Set your VPN to a non-extradition country. We're getting ready to talk about pro wrestling's greatest secret. Let's get smartened up on Kayfabe. Unless you're Brendan Fraser from the 1999 hit film Blast from the Past, by this point you understand that pro wrestling is predetermined. From its humble beginnings as a carnival athletic competition to the now billion-dollar-a-year industry we see today, pro wrestling's growth has been attributed to its greatest creation, one of its most cherished secrets, Kayfabe. Our story begins in the early days of pro wrestling, where carnivals and traveling shows were the main stage. In America in the early 1900s, pro wrestling was seen as a legitimate sport and was very trendy for the time. Stars like George Hackenschmidt and Frank Gotch were known the world over for their talents inside the ring. Gotch is said to have wrestled over 6,000 matches, losing less than 10 in his whole career. However, the boom period wouldn't last forever, and popularity of wrestling declined from 1915 to 1920, mainly arising from the question that, was professional wrestling real? Was it an actual sporting contest? Depending on who you believe, this was also the time that pro wrestling started being predetermined, or worked. What this meant, instead of it being a legitimate sporting competition, the two combatants in the ring would be working together to tell an intricate story and put on a wrestling match that would entertain the fans. Now, where did kayfabe come from? This is kind of where the stories vary. I'm going to tell you both of them. I think in the end, there's probably truth in both of them. It was said some wrestling promoters quickly realized to draw in more crowds, they needed something extra. So they created characters, backstories for the wrestlers. They set up feuds, and as my step-uncle Eric Bischoff said, controversy creates cash, and the fans were hooked with this new turn to the theatric. But you may ask yourself, how did you get all these elite athletes to throw sporting competition aside and start choreographing matches? Well, to get that answer, we have to look at the wrestling matches of the time. Wrestling matches back then could go for an hour plus, a legitimate fight with an individual for an hour. If anyone out there has ever been in a fight, you know that fighting for more than 3 or 4 minutes is absolutely near impossible unless you're a professional. So they thought, hey, instead of beating the crap out of each other for an hour, let's just work this match. We can end it in 15 minutes, same payday, less work. Easy sell, right? So a deal was struck. Professional wrestling would be worked from here on out, with promoters on board in the hopes of more money and wrestlers on board with the hopes of less rigorous work. A plan was hatched. But what would keep this clever ruse away from prying eyes of the media and fans alike? Kayfabe. Now, the definition of kayfabe has changed a lot over time, but the main takeaway is what you see in the ring or in television regarding the world of professional wrestling is real. From the rivalries to the relationships between participants and the acts going on in the ring are genuine and not staged. What this meant for pro wrestlers at the time is they had to be their characters 24/7, 365 if they wanted to keep the gravy train rolling. And if you know anything about gravy or trains, you want to keep them rolling. So they decided to keep a strict adherence to kayfabe. It's now 1920 and most pro wrestling is being worked, and the business was changing. And this new group, the Gold Dust Trio, was set to leave their mark on this new world of sports entertainment. If you're unfamiliar with the Gold Dust Trio, they called themselves that because they said they were guaranteed to make any promoters a ton of money. Basically, that's like calling your rap group Cash Money Millionaires. That's pretty cool. The group consisted of Ed Strangler Lewis with manager Billy Sandow, Damien Sandow, no relation, but the name is an homage, and the legend Joseph Toots Mond. Now, while Ed Strangler Lewis might have been the name that you've heard before, I want to focus on Toots Mond here. This guy to the wrestling world was like Marty McFly to his parents' prom. Toots is the guy who founded the modern-day wrestling style that you and I know and love. At the time, pro wrestling was more mat-based wrestling, which can be fun, but audiences wanted more. You know what I'm talking about if you've ever seen an ROH Pure match. Shout out to ROH. Instead of just the mat-based wrestling, Toots decided he was going to incorporate different styles. Toots would incorporate boxing, Greco-Roman and freestyle wrestling, which is what you see in college or the Olympics, and lumber camp fighting, which involved competitors standing on a floating log trying to knock each other off with various kicks, punches, and throws. What was most important about this new style was a focus on theatrics. And what did the great mind Toots Mond call this new form of combat and theatrics? Slam bang wrestling. Okay, guy's not a great namer. But hear me out. This is the guy who invented tag team wrestling. You know that spot where the heels, they distract the referee? He invented that. So maybe he gets a pass on the bad name. The Gold Dust Trio also created one of the first promotions for professional wrestling, signing wrestlers to exclusive contracts, which was unheard of for the time. Audience were hooked with long-term storylines and feud, all because they believed what they saw in the ring was real. Because kayfabe was kept as a closely guarded secret. As time went on, kayfabe evolved in the 50s and the 60s, the golden age of wrestling with legendary figures like Gorgeous George and Lou Thesz. As pro wrestling got more popular, the media started covering the lives of professional wrestlers, giving them no place to take their metaphorical and sometimes literal mask off of their professional wrestling personas. It would be about 60 years from its inception before the word kayfabe was ever seen by even the most devoted professional wrestling fans. The year's now 1988, none other than Dave Meltzer prints the word for the first time in his Wrestling Observer newsletter. The wrestling landscape is much different now in the late 80s, but kayfabe is still being held on to. But the rise of Vince McMahon's WWE and the birthplace of WrestleMania has changed everything. Kayfabe was tested, and sometimes it cracked, but the biggest wrestling company in the world was able to keep kayfabe alive and well. It wasn't until the government got involved. And now you may be asking yourself, what did the government do in attempts to get Vince McMahon to divulge a secret that has literally held the professional wrestling together for nearly a century? A secret that's made him his fortune and protected the art as a whole. Why, deregulation, of course. Yeah, so the New Jersey State Senate in 1989 was thinking about removing wrestling from the list of sports that needed to be regulated by the state, something Vinnie Mac wanted real bad. So much so that it said that he spent nearly $1 million when adjusting for inflation, lobbying for the deregulation. So Vince essentially gave $1 million to a bunch of state senators and told the world that pro wrestling was a work, just so he no longer had to require wrestlers to be cleared to participate or have an ambulance stationed at an event in case of an injury. It's very cool. It's very nice. It's very Vince McMahon. But kayfabe's now gone and pro wrestling's completely crumbled. And it's now a distant memory, and I miss it a whole bunch. Just kidding. Pro wrestling's bigger than it ever has been, with a number of fans, promotions, and social media interactions through the roof. Now, kayfabe has a new meaning to most of pro wrestling fans. Now it just means the suspension of disbelief. We, the audience, know that what we're seeing is a work, but we don't care. Everything on TV is a work. Pro wrestling is scripted as well, just like Game of Thrones. We're not so much worried about being tricked anymore as we are more concerned with being entertained. This has allowed many more freedoms in the professional wrestling world and pushing the art form even further. I, for one, think the cinematic matches are a welcomed addition. But in this new world of pro wrestling, there's always going to be folks who don't want change, and they long for the days of old. But pro wrestling, just like any art, is going to change. We can respect the past while looking forward to the future and where the art form is headed. And I, for one, am excited to see where it goes. If you made it this far in the video, I want to first say thank you so much. It means the world to me. And if you want to support the channel, the best way to support the channel is like and subscribe on this video. Thank you so much. Remember, be kind to one another.